Who draws the line? So recently on YouTube, there have been a couple of YouTube figures that have had some controversy. One is Logan Paul, and the other is Shane Dawson. So Logan Paul got into trouble because he went to Japan and filmed a suicide victim in a suicide forest over there. Shane Dawson has made some comments in the past on his podcast that some have took to say that these are the comments of a pedophile. That they weren't funny comments, they were, So whether that be the case or not, and from seeing the comments, they seem to be really something that's someone trying to really push the line. But even if that's the case, when you take both of these people and the controversy that's surrounding both of them, the question becomes, has anyone crossed the line? And that's actually interesting. And when it comes to like Shane Dawson, the comedian George Carlin had this to say about comedy and crossing the line. So in particular, the Logan Paul situation and filming the suicide victim, that has really made people say this person has crossed the line in doing this. Now, what I haven't been hearing is this. So everyone thinks that there's a line that you shouldn't cross, and that's why people can get outraged when YouTube figures or political figures or whatever seem to step over this line that people think exists, and so they're wrong in doing so. They shouldn't have done that. My question is, who draws that line? If it's something that includes all of humanity, then the line has to be drawn by something that's outside of humanity. It can't be a subjective thing. So who does that? It's not going to be like an alien or something like that, because if you move people from one planet to another, the line still has to be there. Rights and wrongs aren't going to just change just because you move to a different space. So is that what happens? Is the line drawn everywhere you go? Or is it not? If it's not, then the line doesn't exist. There's no line to be drawn in the world if an outside entity with some kind of a mind doesn't make a judgment here and say, this is the line that people shouldn't cross. And there's only one option in terms of who that person is going to be, in terms of who draws that line, and that's what humanity commonly refers to as God. You can say that God doesn't exist, but if that's the case, then stop getting mad at these YouTubers and whoever else that you might think cross some sort of line. Because if God doesn't exist, then the line doesn't exist. Someone has to draw it. How could it possibly be that Logan Paul or even Shane Dawson cross a line that they themselves would draw in their own head? If everyone draws their own line, how is it possible to cross a line? It's not. I mean, these things would be subjective illusions. The thing that people need to remember is that if you think there's a line, that means God exists. And if God exists and there is a line, then where have you crossed the line? Everyone wants to immediately jump out and start blaming people. They want to start pointing out wrongs. But you also have to ask yourself, where have you crossed the line? And if you have crossed the line, and most likely you have in some way at some point in your life, then who is going to pay for that? Who's going to pay for the time that you crossed the line? If a line is drawn, that means there's some kind of justice system going on here. And that means that God is going to be the judge of that justice system. So if that's the case, when are you going to be punished for the thing that you did in your past? Guaranteed you did something. Probably are going to do something else in the future. So who's going to pay for that? Isn't that a problem? Now, everything I'm saying here has to do with just using logic. So you can get to God existing by using logic. Just by noticing that everyone thinks that there's a line in the world, there's no reason for us to think that. I mean, if God didn't exist, then we should just be like animals. So there's something different about humans. We have been given something to recognize that there are things called right and wrong, and there has to be some kind of outside standard for that, and the only standard that's possible is going to be God. So if God is the standard for justice, if God is the standard for what is best, what is ultimately good, then how do we reconcile the judgment part of it? We want these people to have justice, we want these people to be judged in some way that we think crossed the line. Something's got to happen with us because we've probably crossed the line, and I've talked about this in a past video. If God is ultimate justice, then every single wrong, no matter how small, has to be paid for. God is also ultimate forgiveness, so this too needs to be reconciled in a way so that He can forgive justly. Conclusion: God must pay for all wrongs Himself. By doing this, it is completely fair for Him to forgive, because He took all the punishment for each wrong. Also, God's ultimate justice remains intact, because all wrongs have been paid for. So, where do God's ultimate justice and ultimate forgiveness meet? Answer: at a crossroads. And that's ultimately the truth behind everything. And that's why Jesus made that claim in John 14:6, that I am the way, the truth, and the life. And that's a God claim, and that's what we need to recognize, and that's what we need to go towards in order to fix the problems here. The reason people cross the line a lot of times, maybe they don't have a foundation, maybe you don't. And maybe you don't because you're not recognizing that God draws the line. So that's what we need to do. We need to seek the truth in order to figure out how we should act as people and how we should judge other people, what works and what doesn't. The only way you're going to figure out any of that is to go by the standard that knows everything and is ultimately the greatest being that could ever possibly be. The standard, the starting point of all things, the truth incarnate. And so that's what we need to go towards. And we need to remember that the way to the truth means life, and that we need to listen when the truth speaks.